Washington is making a big push for some of their top targets in the 2027 class.
You are Locked On Huskies, your daily podcast on the Washington Huskies, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back into another edition of the Locked On Huskies podcast. I'm Roman Tomashoff. I'm the site editor with Huskies Wire. Thank you for making this your first watch or first listen of the days. We are part of the Locked On Podcast Network, the #1 sports podcast network. And just a quick reminder to all you everydayers out there, wherever you might be getting this podcast, YouTube, Spotify, Apple Music, Amazon Music, wherever that might be, please make sure to click that subscribe button, click that little bell as well, so you never miss when we post a new show. Plus, if you're on the audio-only side of things, please make sure to leave us a 5-star review, as it does help the show out a lot. Now, I got a really fun show coming at all you everydayers on this Tuesday. I want to spend some time later on having a bit of an extended discussion on what we talked about on Monday's bonus show as it pertains to Stanford and now UW quarterback Elijah Brown, what that might mean for the future of that position, and how it pertains to the 2027 class as well. But before we get there, there's so many prospects that I want to talk about in terms of guys that Washington's been on the road visiting or who they've been connected with over the last couple of weeks, again, with coaches on the road and everything like that. Zerek Sidney, Reis Russell, a couple of names a little bit later on, so we'll get there. But I want to start with some of these high-profile defenders that Washington went to visit, and they started at one of the biggest powerhouse programs in the country, and that's St. John Bosco down in Southern California. And Washington's biggest target there, who has been a familiar name for all you everydayers out there for a very long time, is 4-star safety Isala Aisa Wily-Ava. Now, this is a guy who released a top 8 a while back and included Washington among programs like Michigan, Texas, Ohio State, a couple others, and he has continued to pick up steam on the recruiting trail. And just a quick reminder for all of you, after he took an unofficial visit to Washington last September when the Huskies took on Ohio State, he received a crystal ball to pick the Huskies from rivals Adam Gorney. So that's something to keep in mind, because he spoke with Adam Gorney again recently and said that the 3 schools that he is most interested in, that are recruiting him the hardest, everything like that, are Arizona State, Michigan, and Washington. And again, this is something that Washington has really made a big point of emphasis with the 2027 class, is finding a big hitting, strong safety who can take the role of Alex McLaughlin, who's going to be leaving for the NFL draft after the 2026 season. And I think Isala Aisa Wily-Ava fills this role perfectly. At 6'2", 195 pounds. He's ranked as one of the top 200 players in the nation, one of the best just all-around safeties in this class. And I've been so impressed with his film, with the way he identifies runs and is able to just trigger downhill and fill gaps and shoot him at when he's blitzing as well. I love everything that he brings to the table in that regard, as well as what he's able to do over the top in coverage as a sophomore. He recorded 7 interceptions and was named a Max Preps All-American for that. And I think all of that is tremendous, because all of that is exactly what Ryan Walters is looking for in terms of a safety, because as we've talked about a lot on this show, since Ryan Walters took over as defensive coordinator, a lot of what his scheme is revolved around a safety who can tackle and just really just act as the focal point of the defense, like we saw Alex McLaughlin do in 2025, and like we're going to see him do again in 2026, and maybe in 2027, Gavin Day takes over that role. Maybe it's Ryland Allen. Who knows? We'll cross that bridge when we get there. But in terms of the 2027 class, you need to find a guy who can do that. And in terms of size, physicality, athleticism, whatever it is you want to say, Isala Aisa Wily-Ava checks all of those boxes. And I think that's going to be just a really interesting recruitment to monitor over the next couple of months, because there's a report going out that he's going to be at Michigan spring game on April 18th. So it doesn't feel like we're going to see a commitment anytime soon. I could certainly be wrong about that, but that's something that I'm going to be monitoring very, very closely, because Washington was out in full force at St. John Bosco. And I know that, for all you everydayers on YouTube there, might have seen the thumbnail, got a little bit cut off. My apologies to 3-star linebacker Josiah Poyer and linebackers coach Brian Odom. It was just hard to fit everyone in when I was trying to do the aspects and different things like that. But speaking of Josiah Poyer, he's not the only linebacker at St. John Bosco that Washington is recruiting. There's also twin linebackers, Ethan and Justin Coach. And I'm really curious to see how this linebacker class is going to shape up, because a guy we've talked about a lot on this program is four-star linebacker Liu Falamoli, who transferred from Eastside Catholic here in Seattle down to IMG Academy in Florida. So we'll see how that might play out, because Washington, again, sending not just Brian Odom and Taylor Mays, but Jedd Fisch as well down there, just kind of shows how interested they are in all of these guys and getting all of those targets in the boat when Jedd Fisch goes down there. And I just think that this is going to be a recruitment, all three of these guys, truly, because it's also very interesting when you go and you check out the 247 rankings. Those guys are ranked number 42, 43, and 44 in terms of the linebacker positional ranking. So I think that part of this is really, really interesting as well. But you look at those guys, especially with Poyer at 6'1", 225 pounds. He's more of that true inside linebacker where I like his range. I like his motor. I think that he can do a lot of things really, really well in the middle of this defense, where you're going to see some turnover following the 2026 season with X-Ray Alexander out of eligibility. Buda Alukta will have one more. We'll see what happens with him coming off the knee injury that he suffered in 2025. Jacob Manu obviously also going to be out of eligibility. So there's going to be room for 2 or 3 linebackers in this class. And I think the Coach twins, who are listed at 6'2" and 6'3" and 205 pounds, I think that they certainly bring the versatility aspect that Ryan Walters and Brian Odom have been looking for with guys with size and length, like Ramzak Fruin, like Isaiah Tokyo, Donovan Robinson, Zajas Renisale, the guys that the Huskies have prioritized over the last couple of years at that position. And I think that if you're able to get, especially the Coach twins in the boat, they're the ones who I'm interested in that can play that role, where, as we said with Josiah Poyer, it's certainly going to be more confined to that Mike role in the middle of the field. I really like where Washington is going in terms of how they're just shaping up this front seven to compete in the Big Ten, with all the size and the length at linebacker and the versatility that it gives you to not just necessarily have to roll out 1 or 2 different kinds of personnel packages in the front seven. Having these kinds of linebackers can just make you so much more multiple in several different areas. And I'm very curious to see how those recruitments play out. Another guy who I want to mention here right off the top is 4-star cornerback Josiah Molden, who I mentioned this with our insiders. You can check that out down in the link below as well. He's going to be on an unofficial visit to Washington this weekend, as a source told me. And I believe that he is somebody who, after releasing his top 6 on Monday afternoon of Miami, Ohio State, Oregon, Texas, USC, and Washington, this is a guy that the Huskies have been prioritizing for a while. And to see him go elsewhere would be a really big blow. And obviously it's going to be very hard to keep him away from Oregon, where his dad went, right? And you'd much rather see him follow in the footsteps of his brother Elijah Molden and come to Washington, where I think he'd be a really fun fit in the nickel to take over for Rashawn Clark whenever he maybe moves outside or just graduates and moves on, because he just looks exactly like his brother. I wanted to say something else there. And for all you everydayers out there, you know that whenever I talk about him, I try to stay away from the, oh yeah, he looks like a bigger version of Elijah Molden. And it sounds like a lazy comparison, but it's really the truth. He is so smart. And it's so clear that he's been raised in a family that just understands how to play defensive back, with his dad being a former first-round pick who played in the NFL for 8-9 years. It was, again, a first-round pick of the New Orleans Saints. Now Elijah, who's playing a big role with the Los Angeles Chargers. I believe that Josiah Molden and Isala Aisa Wily-Ava are the 2 biggest priorities for this Washington coaching staff in the secondary in this class. And to see them just getting on the short lists for both these guys is great. That's exactly what you want, right? But now it's about closing. And I'm so curious to see how this secondary is going to shape up, because you got an early commitment from Maurice Williams. And it's nice to secure a guy like that as early as you did, because it allows you to just put more energy into recruiting Josiah Molden, into recruiting Isala Aisa Wily-Ava. And over the next couple of months, as guys start to set visits and we start to see more targets come off the board in one way or another, like Mikhail Davis from Arizona, who was a big-time player on Washington's board. They were very, very intrigued in him. Seeing him go elsewhere really did hurt. But if you're able to secure both of these guys, it certainly makes up for that loss. And I really like the way this class is shaped up early on, and it could be getting another piece in a matter of days. And we'll get there right after a message from our good friends over at Mazda. This is Mazda's moving the game forward. For those who show there's more to the score than what's on screen. And one person who's certainly been moving the game forward over these last couple of weeks is sophomore guard Zoom Diallo. I've been so impressed with the jumps that he's taken in his game from his freshman to his sophomore season. He's really improved as a three-point shooter. I love the way that he's just been able to not only add that to his bag, but just become so much more under control in the short to intermediate part of his game, because that's always where that's where his bread and butter has been. But seeing him just do that and improve and become Washington's second leading scorer this season has been so much fun to watch. These remind us of what it really takes to raise the bar. It's that extra work off the court, dialing in every detail, giving it that extra fire, that grit, and I never quit. We put that same passion into every model. Highlights make the reel. What it took to get there makes it count. There's more to a Mazda because there's more to you. We've also got a message from our good friends over at the Space Needle. After 4 p.m., the Space Needle's Pint and a Pie gives you the whole package. Entry, a savory or sweet tip-top pie, and a pint of beer, wine, or a non-alcoholic drink, all for just $35 per person. Minimum purchase of 2 required. Pint and a Pie is your launch pad to game night, whether that be a concert, a Kraken game, anything that you might be going to check out at Climate Pledge Arena. Space Needle is Seattle's most iconic destination, not just for the views, but for evening fun. Rather than trying to cram into a crowded sports bar right before, why not enjoy a little space and a great view while pre-gaming with your favorite cocktails? Host the home team, then roll into Climate Pledge with the best pre-game story in Seattle. Only $35 per person, limited time offer, 21 plus only, ID required. Get tickets at spaceneedle.com, minimum 2 required. To all you everydayers out there, thank you so much for making Locked On Huskies your first watch or first listen of the day. And thank you again for making Locked On the #1 sports podcast network. If you haven't already, go check out our new Everydayer Club. It's really cool. We got a whole bunch of really fun perks, like access to an ad-free audio feed for Locked On Huskies, and that's compatible with Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and every other major podcast app. And you get an invite to the members-only Locked On Everydayer Club Discord server, which includes a group chat just for listeners of Locked On Huskies. I'll be hanging out there as well. There are a whole bunch of other channels for you to check out for all your other interests: NFL, MLB, NBA, all college football. There's a big server in there for that as well. It's really fun. Go check it out by going to lockedonhuskies.supercast.com or tap the link in the show notes to learn more. Now, as we move on here, there are a whole bunch of other targets I wanted to get to. One of them, I was hitting at him right before the break, is 4-star wide receiver Zerek Sidney. Now, this is one of the first names we were talking about in the 2027 class because Washington had been in on him for a while. He cut his list down to 5 a month or so ago, and now he has set a commitment date for Thursday, January 29th, and I feel really good about where Washington stands with him. We're going to talk a lot more about that over the next couple of days. Arizona State and Oklahoma are the other 2 teams in his final 3, and with the relationship that Kevin Cummings has been developing with him for a very, very long time, I think Washington is sitting in a great spot here. But it's not just because of that relationship. It's because this kid at 6 foot, 175 pounds, he's ranked as the number 36 wide receiver and number 6 player in Arizona in the 27 class by 247 Sports. I think he is a great fit for the system. He is another guy that falls into the 2026 mold of Mason James, Trez Davis, who can play outside in the Z, he can play inside the slot a little bit if you need him to move in there, and is just really good at finding different ways to separate. He's got decent long speed to stretch the field if you do want to line him up out in the Z spot, but he's a really nice route runner. I like what he can do in terms of his releases. He's very advanced in terms of just finding different ways to get open without letting guys get hands on him on the line of scrimmage in press coverage. And I think that obviously that's going to be a little tougher at the college level, but in terms of what he has shown to this point in his career, I think that he's got a very high ceiling and that this would be a really nice offense for him to operate in. I'm very curious to see how that would impact Washington's receiver recruiting in the 2027 class, but that is a conversation for later in the week if he were to commit to Washington. One guy who is absolutely critical to what Washington does want to keep moving in terms of where this offense is going moving forward is 3-star center Reis Russell. This is a guy who Michael Switzer has done a pair of visits with out in Colorado now. He went and visited him and watched the national championship at his home last week and then did an in-school visit at Valor Christian in Colorado on Monday. I'm very intrigued by Reis Russell because you don't always see just a lot of high-end pure centers out there It's usually something that guys are learning. And for Reis, at the college level, at the very least, Landon Hatchett was another or a really great example of somebody who was just a natural center that came in, was able to continue to do it. Parker Brailsford as well. Washington has had some good success along those lines. And I think Reis Russell just falls into that same boat, where he's someone who took several visits to UW over the course of the season. And as he's garnered a lot of interest from around the country, it feels like Washington and Nebraska are the biggest programs just kind of in the mix for his recruitment right now in terms of the front runners. Oregon is starting to close in, though. And he picked up an offer from them a week or two ago, is going to be out at their junior day this coming weekend, and getting a couple of different opportunities to go out there and visit him and just keep yourself in the mix was a nice move by Michael Switzer, and I think is just going to be crucial as his recruitment continues to play out. Because again, I think I counted seeing him on campus at least 3 different times this year, and that's just one of those things where you can't let kids like that get away, because he's just such a good fit for what you want to do in the middle of the offensive line. And he's someone who I don't expect him to start as a true freshman at center. That's just a really big, difficult transition to make. But if he's someone who does wind up at Washington, I love what the long-term outlook for somebody with his size and physicality would be in the middle of this offensive line and in the Big Ten as well. And if he has to sit behind a Lowen Coleman Brusa, maybe you go out and you add a center to the transfer portal, if that's what Jedd Fisch really wants to do. Whoever winds up taking over that gig once Landon Hatchett does graduate and depart, I feel really good about Reis Russell being a guy that would be in the mix to start pretty early on in his career, and is someone who I think could make a very significant impact at Washington. Now, let's talk about a couple other names that are a little bit newer to Locked On Huskies, but I think are very, very important to talk about. One of them is, just to stay on the topic of the offense here, is 4-star wide receiver Ty Johnson from Crean Lutheran High School down in Southern California. This is another one where we're going to talk a little bit about Jedd Fisch's presence at Crean Lutheran, what that might mean in a couple of minutes. But for Ty Johnson, who has 24 offers with Arizona, Georgia, Oregon, Texas Tech being some of the other top teams in the mix for his services, I think that Washington has made a nice push here. And the biggest thing for me, and it's something we've talked about a lot over the last week or two, right, is the shift in wide receiver recruiting that we're seeing in the 2027 class, where last year you prioritize a couple of guys who can play that big outside X position. And I think that is where things are just starting to shift for Washington with this class, and with a guy like Ty Johnson. Let's say Zerek Sidney does commit to Washington on Thursday. I feel like there's only going to be one spot remaining, and you want it to be one of these bigger guys in that mold who can be isolated. He's still a good enough athlete to move around the formation and give you snaps and give you quality reps at other spots. But what he does best is just win in contested catch situations, can play isolated and just eat up double teams, do whatever it is that you need to do in terms of just, he commands that kind of presence whenever he steps on the field. And that is clearly the plan for Jordan Clay. That's clearly what Denzel Boston was for the last 2 years during his time at Washington. And I feel like Ty Johnson at 6'2" and 205 pounds is somebody who Jedd Fisch and Kevin Cummings can absolutely envision in that same vein. And so I'm curious to see what happens with that, because there are several others in terms of just, again, this big, long type of receiver that Washington is pursuing in this class, whether it be Ty Johnson, whether it be Trey Moore from Texas, who Kevin Cummings took an in-home visit with late last week. He's somebody I'm keeping a close eye on. Damani Warren from Nevada is another one that Washington has certainly been very, very interested in. Zion White from IMG Academy is down to a top 3 of UW, Oregon, and Tennessee. So, and he's another guy, 6'3", 6'4". So all these guys that are bigger, longer, can really run for you a little bit. That is what Washington wants to prioritize in this class at wide receiver, and still adding someone in that Zerek Sidney mold to keep the versatility of the offense alive is very important. But prioritizing these bigger guys on the boundary has been just such a big focus, and I'm curious to see how it plays out, because I think Ty Johnson could be a sneaky target for Washington over the next couple of months. And another guy who the Huskies have showed a lot of interest in as of late is 4-star cornerback Evan Mack, who is his teammate at Crean Lutheran High School. And this is another guy, 6'2", 6'3", super long, lanky kind of body, where if he fills out his frame, he's going to be a menace in press coverage with just how physical he is at the line of scrimmage and how he likes to attack and not let receivers get clean releases, which I know you've probably heard that before on this podcast, all you everydayers out there, because that is exactly what John Richardson is looking for at the position. And I really like how Evan Mack fits into this defense. And as the secondary class plays out, I'm curious to see what it's going to look like, because we talked about Josiah Molden, who can be, an inside outside kind of flex guy who can do a couple of different things for you. Maurice Williams, the one commit that Washington has at corner right now, is certainly more of a true outside guy. Obviously, Isala Aisa Wily-Ava, true safety. But as this class continues to take shape, I feel like I wouldn't be surprised if Washington takes two more guys in this big outside boundary sort of mold just to really help replenish that position after losing Takario Davis and Ephesians Prysock. Yeah, you're going to get 2 years out of Emmanuel Carnley if he decides to come back for the 2027 season. Dylan Robinson's got 3 years of eligibility remaining. So I just think that Washington has a major opportunity to restock that room. I feel like we might see 5 guys in the secondary again after taking 5 in this past class, but it's just something to watch. And I think no matter how this secondary class does play out, Evan Mack is one of those guys who I'm sure if you're John Richardson, Ryan Walters right now, you're sitting there saying, this is a guy we can absolutely build this class around because he's big, he's long, he's strong, he's not afraid to play the run, and he can really excel in press man coverage, which is what both of those guys just love to run and teach so much. So I'm really curious to see how that's going to just factor in down the stretch here as Washington looks to continue adding to what could wind up being a very talented group of defensive backs. But let's switch gears here a little bit because Jedd Fisch was at Crean Lutheran to talk to 4-star quarterback Caden Jones, and I still have some questions about what quarterback could look like moving forward. And we'll get to that right after a message from our good friends over at TurboTax. Tax season doesn't have to take over your life. This year, TurboTax is making it easier than ever to just hand things off and move on with your day. With TurboTax Full Service, you can have your taxes done for you by a trusted local expert, start to finish, without the stress or guesswork. Instead of spending hours trying to figure out forms, you can meet with a local TurboTax expert in person or connect online. They handle everything from W-2s to self-employed forms and work to get you every deduction. You can upload your documents, go about your day, and get updates right in their TurboTax app. It's a huge time saver and gives real peace of mind knowing an expert is handling it. For a limited time, you can have your taxes done by a local TurboTax expert for just $150 all in if a TurboTax expert didn't file for you last year. Just file by February 28th. Take taxes off your plate and get back to your life. Visit turbotax.com/local to book your appointment today. All right, as we wrap up today, let's talk quarterback because Crean Lutheran, like I said, was a real hotbed for the Huskies over the last couple of days where Jedd Fisch and John Richardson went down, talked to Ty Johnson, talked to Evan Mack, but they also went and spoke with 4-star quarterback Caden Jones. And this is a guy who I've been really intrigued by for a while. I know we've talked about him before here on Locked On Huskies because he is one of those rare prospects that holds a dual sport offer from Washington. He not only has an offer to play quarterback for Jedd Fisch, but he also has an offer from Danny Sprinkle to join the basketball team. So I'm very curious to see how this recruitment is going to play out. I know he didn't play a whole bunch as a sophomore. He's limited by an injury. Seems like he bounced back this past season. And this is a guy where you turn on the film, that speed and athleticism, they really pop right off the bat. And I'm just very curious to see how this is going to play out in terms of the quarterback position as a whole, because you look at Sione Kaho, it's very clear that Washington is doing everything in their power to try to keep him home. And I feel like they're just sitting in a really good spot based on some of the comments that he's made and everything like that. I know he pushed back his commitment date where he said it was supposed to be end of January, early February. He put out a tweet saying that was not going to be the case anymore. I still feel good about where Washington is in that regard, but I look to the future and I'm so curious to see how things are going to play out. And I kind of wanted to just continue a discussion that we had on the bonus show that I released on Monday afternoon, talking about Elijah Brown, the Stanford quarterback who committed to Washington. Go check that out if you haven't just yet. But I look at that situation and it just makes me think of what quarterback is going to look like by the time 2027 rolls around. And I feel like one of the biggest reasons that Jedd Fisch wanted to go and bring in a guy like Elijah Brown is to make sure that he just had some extra experience on the roster moving forward and someone else who can compete for the starting job. Because yes, I've seen a lot of comments over the last couple of days that the only way to get experience is to play. And especially at quarterback, obviously, yes, you can only put one guy out there at a time, but this is just the way Jedd Fisch has been operating. And it just kind of is what it is. And you have to take it in stride, in my opinion, because if Keenan McMillan or Dash Byerly or Derek Zammit beats out Elijah Brown for quarterback 2 in 2026, great. Of course you're happy with that, right? If it does wind up being Elijah Brown, okay, awesome, cool. You have that guy on the roster. But I look at 2027 as the year that I'm very, very curious about, because let's just say, and just continue with the hypothetical that we were using on the bonus show, that the quarterback commit for the 2027 class is Sione Kaho. If that kid comes in, I like his talent right off the bat. If he wins the backup job right off the bat, I wouldn't necessarily be shocked. But the elephant in the room is what happens with Damon Williams. And I feel like there is a very realistic scenario. It just doesn't seem like I'm breaking any news with this, that 2026 will be his last year at Washington in one way or another, with just how this past season went. Things are more than subject to change, right? It's January 26th as I sit here and I'm recording this. There is plenty of time for things to change and things to smooth over, if you will, whatever it is that you want to say. So if he doesn't have a, necessarily tremendous season and wants to return to Washington for his senior year and, achieve whatever goals he and Jedd Fisch set out for in 2027, great. You still have a tremendous talent at that position. You can go from there. But on the whatever odds you want to put on it, occasion that he either enters the draft with a good year or decides to enter the transfer portal to, chase the money that LSU or Miami or whoever else was rumored to be throwing at him during that 72-hour tumultuous period of him in the transfer portal. Okay. What does that look like then? And I think that is where bringing in somebody like Elijah Brown is solid. And just to, parlay this into talking a little bit more about the 2027 class, it just gives you a better safety blanket to fall back on, because we saw what the plan was for Damon Williams during his first season on Montlake, and I feel like he's a little bit unique in that regard with what Washington knew they were getting into in terms of the roster as a whole, with Will Rogers and with everything else like that, where it's, okay, yeah, we know we need to have a guy like this because it's just going to be, again, just that safety net to help with quarterback play and help just not, everything be a total rebuild and a total turnover. You're starting from a somewhat higher floor because of that experience. And I feel like that was A, the goal of Elijah Brown, and B, could really help one of these two guys, if let's just say they're the two options that are out there right now, quarterback, which I feel like they are, settle in if one of them were to commit to Washington, because you're bringing a guy like that. It's, okay, yeah, all right, Elijah Brown or Justin Keenan McMillan, whatever. That guy goes into the season as the starter, but he can't hold it because Sione Kaho pushes him too much. And Sione Kaho shows the arm talent that's just absolutely undeniable. He's a really nice athlete. You can't keep that kind of guy off the field. Okay, you can go from there. And obviously, being in college football, everything is somewhat short term, right? But I'm very intrigued to see how this is going to play out over the next year, 12 to 18 months, whatever it is you want to call it, because there's so much time for things to change with the Damon Williams situation and with everything else going on. But I don't necessarily know if that's something that I'm concerned about right now, especially as it pertains to quarterback recruiting, because I look at just, again, some of the comments that Sione Kaho has made with how he feels about Washington, where they're standing as recruitment, everything else like that right now. And I feel really good about that. And I don't think that the Damon Williams situation impacts that too much. If anything, I feel like it might help Washington standing with some of their top quarterback targets, because you can look at it, and I'm sure, this is something that Jedd Fisch and Jimmy Doherty wouldn't want, and JP Losman wouldn't bring up in these meetings, but it's something that I'm sure that families would have this kind of discussion of, well, hey, look at how that situation went with Damon in the portal and all that. You could certainly come in and push to have a spot on the depth chart, maybe even potentially take over as a starter right away, depending on how those things play out. So I feel like that's a conversation that has been had at some point in time. And that's the only thing that I would say factors into this current situation and how Washington would look at quarterback moving forward from all of this. But it's all just something to consider. It's something to kick around and say, oh, okay, what if this happens? How is that going to play out? And it's all kind of just different sort of domino effects as to how one action could impact the next, and so on and so forth. And I know it feels like I'm talking in a circle with all this, but that's just kind of how it feels right now with the way everything is sitting in terms of this particular situation, because I think that Damon Williams is an incredibly talented quarterback, and whatever happens next at Washington is what happens. You can have whatever feelings you will about how the situation played out, how he handled it, how anybody in that situation handled what happened. But as it pertains to Washington's long-term quarterback plan, I think that there is a very solid plan in place because you just have so many talented options on the roster now. And if you want to go in and bring in one more from the high school ranks, not if you want to, you will. The question is which one. I think that Washington has done a really, really good job of managing for both the present and the future, and that there are a lot of things to like about what could come next for this program as a whole at that position. So the only thing that is going to get to the bottom of what that looks like is time. But until then, we're going to be talking about all of that and everything else around the world of UW athletics here on Locked On Huskies. So please make sure you subscribe wherever you get your podcasts, whether that's YouTube, Spotify, Apple Music, Amazon Music. We're there. We're everywhere. We're updating the channel with new content every single day. So please make sure you click that like button, click that little bell so you never miss when we post a new show. Plus, if you have any questions, comments, concerns, drop them right down below in the comment section. And if you're audio only, please give us a 5-star review, as it does help us out a lot. Thank you so much for tuning in, and I'll talk to you on Wednesday.